Hi, it's Dwyer, dwyercrime.blog. Also, keeping it free.blogspot.com. Today is March 28th, 2023. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, I was my daughter's age in the early 1970s, right? She's 7 years old now. Back then, you had heroic, and I mean heroic, members of the press who were willing to go wherever the evidence took them, who were willing to take on people in power, right? Daniel Ellsberg, you might recall him. Cy Hirsch, who fortunately is still with us and is still breaking big stories. Woodward and Bernstein. Now, unfortunately, in my eyes, the press today has lost its fastball. You still have some brave souls out there, Matt Taibbi, for example, but many people are afraid of sounding ridiculous, of throwing out some information, hoping that others will take the ball and run with it. We'll do the research, we'll get the PhDs that come with great investigative research, right? We'll get the career promotions. Well, understand, I study true crime. Some crimes are bigger than others. For me, there are a series of crimes. One of them is the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy, where people, in my opinion, and you should interpret everything I'm saying in this video as opinion, right? View it with suspicion. What I ask is that viewers do their own independent research to see if the facts align. But one of the assassinations that has always troubled me is the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. I've spoken about it here online before, and it still troubles me. I believe there's an illusion in the pantry at the Ambassador Hotel that we need to, if possible, take out the room, right? I want people to think of this without Sirhan, because really he's a distraction. What I want people to realize is that the autopsy does not support the theory that Sirhan shot and killed Robert F. Kennedy. Right, folks? One of the shots is behind Kennedy's ear. Sirhan is feet away. Right? The coroner himself, Noguchi, felt that the gun had to be right up on Kennedy's head. There are scores of witnesses who know that Sirhan wasn't that close to Kennedy. Now, what I want people to do here is, rather than focus on Sirhan, can we instead look at the security guard who had just started working for Robert Mayhew's security agency? Right? Think about it. You have a security guard who's a new employee, and you have him protecting the former Attorney General of the United States, right? The brother of a president who had been assassinated. Now, I want people to realize that if you believe, as I do, that John F. Kennedy was assassinated in part by parts of our own government here in the United States, if you believe that a coup took place in November of 1963, then the last person the people behind the coup could have as President of the United States would be Robert F. Kennedy. Because Bobby would then have the power to fully investigate John F. Kennedy's assassination, and he would have the power to hold those accountable. So, let me just say this, and keep in mind, I know there are many people who will say, oh, gee, how could the John F. Kennedy assassination have been done in-house, right? To those people, all I could say is, where is John F. Kennedy's brain? Right? How do you reconcile the fact that while in government custody, we lost the alleged brain of the president? And of course, you understand that if you look at the Zapruder film, there is no way that the brain they claimed was the brain, right, supposedly bigger than the average brain, could possibly have been John F. Kennedy's. Because parts of his brain are not only in the limo that LBJ has cleaned out almost immediately, but parts of his brain are on the back of the limo, right, as the Zapruder film shows us. Right, so let me just point out, there are other people both in and out of the room when Robert F. Kennedy gets assassinated. Now, just understand that Thane Caesar, who's carrying, or who at least had, we know that much, the same type of gun that killed Robert F. Kennedy, right? The same Thane Caesar who moves out of the country, right? I believe when he dies, he's living in the Philippines years later. Just to understand that his boss, Robert Mayu, testified in front of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence in 1975. And he admitted that in 1960 he was approached by the CIA. Please, folks, look all this up. The CIA wanted him to approach mobster Johnny Rosselli to help assassinate Fidel Castro with poison pills. I know this all sounds ridiculous. Folks, look at Mayhew's testimony. His last name is spelled M-A-H-E-U. Right? This is a guy who was a go-between between the CIA and the mafia. This is a guy with mob ties. Again, his testimony is before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. That's the employer of the security guard who's standing right next to Kennedy at the time Kennedy gets assassinated. Right? Mayhew, of course, claims he took the CIA up on their offer in 1960 to interface with the mob to try to get Castro assassinated out of patriotism. Right? Well, understand who else Mayhew was dealing with. Right? Mayhew, of course, was in the inner circle of Howard Hughes. Right now, what I want people to understand here is that power, real power, can get away with things in broad daylight. Right? Just understand, Mayhew was employed by Howard Hughes for over a decade. Now, if you believe there might have been a payoff, if you believe that Howard Hughes, who, believe it or not, and again, look all of this up, was not only friends with Robert F. Kennedy's father, Joseph P. Kennedy, but actually dated two of his daughters, Kathleen and Jean, in the 1930s. right? If you believe that Hughes had to come up with a way to pay off Mayhew, if you believe that there's a possibility that Mayhew might still have been working for the CIA in 1968, and we're speculating here. I'm not making a statement of fact here. If you believe that Mayhew may have been still working for the CIA in 1968, and that there may have been an operation afoot to make sure that Bobby Kennedy, who had literally just won the California primary, never makes it to the presidency. Just understand that one way to pay off Mayhew in broad daylight, in a way that a prosecutor couldn't point to and say, hey, that's a payoff, would be to call Mayhew a dishonest son of a bitch, and he stole me blind. Then to have Mayhew sue you for defamation of character. And then, of course, to settle that lawsuit. Hughes dies while the lawsuit is pending, right? Have your estate settle the lawsuit for $2.8 million. Understand, Mayhew reaches the settlement in 79. $2.8 million in 1979 dollars is worth a hell of a lot more today. Right, folks? I'm just telling you, when you're dealing with three-dimensional thinkers, you need to think along with them. Well, what I want people to realize is that Howard Hughes supported Richard Nixon in 1960. While Howard, at least superficially, had a good relationship with Bobby Kennedy, just understand that Howard Hughes leaked information about John F. Kennedy's health problems, as well as his mafia ties, to the press. Right? Understand, John F. Kennedy, heavy risk taker, right, was fooling around with Judith Exner, who at one point was fooling around with Sam Giancana from the Chicago outfit. Right? I need for people to just understand that Howard Hughes was not a Kennedy supporter in the 1960 election. Ask yourself, too, who did Howard Hughes buy casinos from in Las Vegas? Right? We've all seen the movie Casino. Understand, Bugsy Siegel helped build Las Vegas. You had a mob presence in Las Vegas. You had Teamster money used to build some of these casinos. Right? So I need to have folks understand that Howard Hughes interfaced with the mob, right? He used Robert Mayhew, the boss of Thane Caesar, who's standing next to Kennedy. When Kennedy gets shot at very close range, the fatal shot, the bullet, according to the coroner, is right up on Kennedy. Right? Just understand that Robert Mayhew served as an interface, helped facilitate some of Howard Hughes' purchases in Las Vegas. Well, it gets deeper than that, folks. Howard Hughes had a very deep crush, and in fact dated Ava Gardner, who of course had an affair with John F. Kennedy. Right? Well, what I want people to contemplate here, because I need for folks to understand how crowded the assassination scene is for Robert F. Kennedy, and please look up this information online, is that there's a hardcore Kennedy supporter who's also in the room. He got shot in the head, by the way, by Sirhan survives. Believe it or not, he was one of the few people who actually directly communicated with Howard Hughes. He was a labor leader who actually helped Howard Hughes acquire Las Vegas properties. His name was Paul Schrade. Right? Paul Schrade, very close to RFK. So just understand what looks like happenstance. Right? Sirhan, young guy in his 20s, starts shooting. Kennedy ends up dead. Right? The security guard is there next to him. We assume that security guard was just there to protect Kennedy and that Sirhan just jumped out of the crowd. Paul Schrade is there supporting his good friend, Bobby Kennedy. Schrade, of course, labor leader. We assume that's all happenstance. Let's take a more jaundiced view. Right? Dane Caesar, next to the president. By the way, he wasn't a Bobby Kennedy supporter. Research that online. Dane Caesar's boss is Robert Mayu, who ends up receiving $2.8 million from Howard Hughes and who was employed by Howard Hughes for 13 years and who admitted before the Senate that he was a go-between between the CIA and the mob. And also in the room is Howard Hughes insider Paul Schrade. Understand, Howard Hughes lets himself go, becomes a hermit later in life. Very few people, very few, had the opportunity to meet with him. Mayu, his employee for 13 years, didn't meet directly with Howard Hughes. Paul Schrade did. Right, folks? Understand how interconnected the people are in the room when RFK gets assassinated. When Robert Mayu sues, may have been legitimate, may have been illegitimate. When he sues Howard Hughes, believe it or not, one of the people who testified on Howard Hughes' behalf was Paul Schrade. Right, folks? That Mayu lawsuit against Hughes supposedly had nothing to do with the RFK assassination. Right? So, to sum up here, just understand that you have a billionaire out there, Howard Hughes, who has one of the few people in the entire world who he communicates with directly, Paul Schrade, in the room, standing right by Robert Kennedy. And of course, also in the room is Hughes' major insider, Robert Mayu, who was Hughes' eyes and ears on several deals, right? His employee or an independent contractor working for him, Dane Caesar. And by chance, these two guys, Dane Caesar and Paul Schrade, are two of the closest people physically standing next to Bobby Kennedy when Bobby Kennedy gets shot. And just understand, the bullets don't match up, right? Please do a simple Google search on the number of bullet holes found in that Ambassador Hotel, right? The bullets don't match up. And of course, Sirhan at trial doesn't make an issue of the autopsy, which would show that someone else fired the fatal shot. Right? So just understand there's a lot here, perhaps more there than meets the eye. If you saw this in a movie, would you believe it? Right? Paul Schrade, very close friend of Howard Hughes, who did not support John F. Kennedy in 1960, right? Who slept with at least one woman who Kennedy slept with, Ava Gardner, right? Who dated two of Robert F. Kennedy's sisters, right? By chance, two of his henchmen, right? Schrade and Mayhew's employee are two of the closest people standing next to Robert F. Kennedy when he's assassinated. And of course, the autopsy report doesn't match up with the idea that Sirhan was the assassin. There are other problems with the scene. Understand, when you're dealing with high-level operatives, not everyone at the scene knows what's going on. Right? If you were watching an ID show and some bystander grabs the murder weapon and doesn't return it until the next day, you would be laughing today and you would say, oh wow, there goes the chain of custody. Rayford Johnson leaves the Ambassador Hotel with the murder weapon, folks. They don't get it until the next day. Right? Just food for thought. Right? So take a hard look at the RFK assassination, just understanding that Paul Schrade may have been a Kennedy supporter and friend, that Howard Hughes may have had mixed agendas, that whoever was behind the assassination of John F. Kennedy understood they could not have his little brother, Robert F. Kennedy, become the President of the United States, because there'd be consequences and repercussions. Right? All of this happens in broad daylight. I would question, too, how Howard Hughes, a billionaire, a very savvy, very successful businessman, decides when talking with the press on the phone that he's going to call one of his trusted associates for the last 13 years, Robert Mayhew, a no-good, dishonest son of a bitch, and he stole me blind, without thinking he was going to get sued. Or did he expect to get sued as part of some setup to make sure that Robert got a windfall at the end, right? That wouldn't be tied up in Howard's estate, that could have been a payoff for some activity, right? I don't believe anyone will ever be criminally found guilty other than Sirhan for the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. But I do find it rather shocking that two of Howard Hughes' henchmen had a presence in that room, that Howard Hughes himself owned casinos in Las Vegas that may have been purchased from the mob, that Hughes' henchman, Robert Mayhew, had done contract work for the CIA in the past, and that everyone saw Sirhan, but very few people have connected the dots to see the presence Howard Hughes had in the room that night at the Ambassador Hotel. Maybe it's all happenstance. I have my doubts. Right? Seems to me that Howard Hughes may have known where the president was going to be. Seems to me that something could have been arranged. I'll agree, prosecutors have combed through Sirhan's actions in the days leading up to the assassination of RFK. Right? But of course, we want to believe Sirhan was a lone wolf. Just understand, Paul Schrade did not believe that Sirhan was the person who killed the president. Paul Schrade, of course, later independently would testify against Thane Caesar's employer, Robert Mayu, in Mayu's lawsuit against Howard Hughes. Let me hear from you. If you think I'm full of it, or if you have additional information that you want to share here with the public, I hope you do so in the comment section of this YouTube video. Right? Just understand, Sirhan is somewhat of a distraction. Right? According to several eyewitness accounts, he never gets that close to Kennedy. Right? He starts firing, people grab him immediately. He draws the eyes of the crowd to him. Right? Now, there's an audio tape that seems to suggest additional shots. There are bullet holes that seem to suggest additional shots. You have experienced LAPD people who saw the bullet holes and who thought they were fresh. And, of course, you have Howard Hughes insider Paul Schrade. And you have Robert Mayu, another Howard Hughes insider. Right? His employee standing right next to RFK when he gets shot and ultimately dies. Right? Think it through, folks. Think it through. If I've misrepresented any of these facts, point out any such misrepresentations or inaccuracies in the comment section of this YouTube video. Ultimately, Robert Mayu gets $2.8 million. A settlement is reached in 1979. Howard Hughes, of course, had died in the mid-1970s. Right? Just understand, Howard Hughes did not like John F. Kennedy's stance on civil rights. He did not like John F. Kennedy's decision to let Cuba coexist in the Western Hemisphere with the United States of America. Howard Hughes had his differences with John F. Kennedy. Right? Also understand, the Kennedy assassination, the John F. Kennedy assassination, today, many Americans believe that that's an inside job. What would happen to those insiders if Bobby got elected president? Could they allow that to happen? Bobby gets killed literally moments after he wins the California primary. You wonder if he would have been assassinated had he lost that primary. Let me hear from you. Thanks for stopping by.